Hey guys, I'm Lucanio,
I'm Eric,
and this is
Politics Through Literature.
Let's Go. So, we're going to pick up where we left off last week. We are speaking about this book, The Seed is Mine, The Life of Kas Maine, a South African sharecropper by Charles van Onselen. So, quick summary of the book. So, we have Kas Maine. He is a sharecropper, and the book is a historical account, a biography of his life and how the land reforms and racial segregation laws impact and displace his family um, throughout the years 1894 to 1985, and how these laws sought to advance white people. So, this book is a phenomenal book, not just because it's a historical account that took a decade of intensive research, but also because it's a story. You know, it's a story of a man. And while it has that scientific crux, that Charles van Onselen regards as an academic, as a researcher, it's also so rich in imagery and it's such a beautiful read. So I want to read a quote that you can actually find in on the cover of this edition. The seed is mine, the plowshares are mine, the span of oxen is mine, everything is mine, only the land is theirs. And I want to ask you, what do you think is the significance of the title, The Seed is Mine?
Throughout history, the battle for ownership of land has been a constant. You find that in biblical texts, in all forms of political ideologies, it's always about the land. And that quote is quite significant in giving us an insight into what this book is all about. There's a lot going on, the relationships that the main character, Kas Maine, experiences throughout his life. And when you really examine them, it's all about ownership of land. The battle for the resources is centered around the land. Kas is a formidable, skilled sharecropper, and as you will later share with everybody, each and every piece of land that Kas worked, the harvest grew tenfold, hundredfold, and yet he never had his land. He never had a piece of land that he could call his. He had the seeds, he had the skills, he had the clear understanding of the weather conditions in all of the areas he worked, but he never had the land. And not taking away from what you want to share with our audience later in the book, how his life ends, as opposed to those who owned the land and the hardships and the experiences that he went through, simply because he did not have the land. He had everything else but the land.
Mm. Yeah, I really agree with that interpretation of the title. It's not even interpretation, it's what is. Um, the land is not his on paper, but the seed is his. And we speak about that in the previous episode. The seed, if we go back to the title, it represents him, he who cultivates the land, he who has what makes the land valuable. That's his. Um, it's like having a vault in a bank and not having any money inside.
True.
It's pointless.
Absolutely, yes, because uh, one might ask, I mean, there's so much literature written and a lot of research about land. The reason America exists is because The Europeans went there looking for land. The reason South Africa was conquered, and of course the entire continent, was in search of land. The relationship that the natives have with land, as opposed to the relationship or the type of relationship the colonizer has with land, is different. The the natives or the indigenous people never had a piece of paper called a title deed, and yet when they wanted to claim that piece of land that is theirs, or they wanted to work the land that the, the imperialists found them on, they were asked for a piece of paper called a title deed.
So it actually leads quite nicely into what I want to speak about in relation to the Bible before we get to the Group Areas Act, because we need to get to the Group Areas Act. We're at a point in the book where now racial segregation laws are established. They're not just, quasi, they're not nascent, they're happening. So we're going to get there. But this piece of paper, I know your relationship with the Bible. I know your feelings about the Bible. However, it's still a text that we have to acknowledge as a massive informant to society.
I think it is a force for good.
Yeah, it is a force for good. It has been used and manipulated. And we have the very first book of the Bible, which everyone is familiar with, Genesis, the creation story. And this is significant because it starts with land, it starts with Eden. And that is what South Africa was. It was an Eden. And one of the lines we know very well, of course, it's been many different translations and versions, but man was put on the land, and he who cultivates the land can keep it, right? And we acknowledge Kas, the bearer of the seed, as the one who cultivates it, and yet he cannot keep this land. So I really liked making that connection, and I wanted to read a passage or a verse from Leviticus. Just for some context, we have the Lord who's speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, and he wants Moses to give a message to the Israelites. And the quote is, or the verse, "The land is not to be permanently sold because it is mine, and you are only aliens and temporary residents on my land." I found this to be really significant, really profound with the story, and even everything that's happening today. With the wars, we can make these connections because this idea of temporary residence, you know, we have this Eden, we have this land, and then we have people coming from far and thinking that, okay, I can take this for myself. And we have never, when I say we, but
the
indigenous people never had that need for possession. Okay, let me not speak of what I don't know, but nowhere, this verse is important because nowhere on this earth can we claim as our God-given right. Under the sun, we are equal, and yet we have people coming, the people who we deem as the human civilization, coming, taking an entire continent, dividing it, demarcating it, displacing families, looting it of its minerals, and we call it a state, we call it a country, we give it a piece of paper, we give it a term. And we were just speaking now about how greed is now respectable.
Yeah, I may add on to that. by saying, look, we all are on a journey. We are born, we walk this land. Would it be prudent to the those who are civilized, those colonizers, the imperialists, to have sat down, got educated on our relationship with land? Because we had kingdoms and queendoms that were custodians of this land. People lived on it, hunted on it. There were laws that governed the movement of people, but they were not brutal laws that threatened you with imprisonment. Uh, the laws were more about sustaining the land, not polluting the land, so that livestock could also have a share, and the inhabitants, the people living on that land, could also produce and enjoy that land without polluting it. So the relationship with land by the indigenous was more spiritual. There was a very deep spiritual connection to the land, vis-a-vis the colonizers' relationship with the land. When they saw the land, for them it was to extract minerals, to make profit. As a result, levels of poverty increased. People were moved away from their land, as you will later discuss Group Areas Act, and we see that at play, brutally moving people away, people not having access to land, and in the 1913 Land Act, which we previously discussed in the last episode, the indigenous were not consulted, yet they ended up with only 7 to 9% of the total land mass of South Africa, what we know as South Africa today. But there was no consultation. Yeah. It was forced on the indigenous people.
So we have Kas Maine, and he travels a lot. He's characterized as a man who moves from farm to farm, from place to place. He is constantly displaced. And this is because of many reasons. Okay, we have his ambition. He sees better prospects elsewhere. Relationships that soured, white black relationships that turned sour.
It's very interesting because from what you're saying, Kas Maine was a nomad. He basically was a nomad in his own country, on his own. He should have settled down. He could have been afforded there could have been justice, and for him to settle down and become a prosperous woman. Instead, he led a nomadic life of some sort, even though he spent sometimes a couple of seasons on one farm or so, but he would eventually move.
But that's the beauty, though, that's about what I was saying, land and this need to possess and keep it. Being a nomad was normal in Africa. We moved freely. There was no such thing as borders. We moved with the seasons. Okay, if it was land was no longer arable at this on this portion of land, okay, we move on to other. Of course, there were villages, and of course there were, there was the custodians that said, okay,
so they're not static.
Exactly, it was not static. And if only Kas had the freedom to be a nomad freely. Because even it doesn't start with Kas, it starts 2 generations back. It starts with his great grandfather, not Hwai, but Sekwala.
Sekwala, yes.
Sekwala. It starts with his great grandfather, and they moved. This was before formal segregation laws, before the Native Land Acts. They moved because of family issues. They were expelled because, his great grandfather didn't like how one chief was operating, and many different reasons. There was that freedom. But for Kas, it was out of necessity. That was the thing. And so we have the Native Lands Act in 1913 that forcibly removed black families from their land. And put them into
reservations.
Reservations. Forced to occupy, we have like what 80% of the population forced to occupy 7% of the country. So, do you mind speaking more about the Group Areas Act? At this point now, we have the Group Areas Act. This was under apartheid, 1948. We have the formalization of racial segregation, Afrikaner nationalism. So, can you speak a little bit about the Group Areas Act?
Yeah, the end of the Second World War. Of course, we discussed a little bit of it. The National Party won the elections, and then they formalized all the relevant segregatory laws in the country, formally called it apartheid. Hendrik Verwoerd was a big part of it, and of course, all the people within the National Party. So the Group Areas Act was basically an act of law that placed people or restricted people from living together. Because prior to that, there were pockets around the country where all races lived together. And with the Group Areas Act, all those areas were completely dismantled and people were moved around based on race. And given the 1913 Land Act, now the majority of the people are black people. And they then moved around to what, 7%? And that 7%, which later went slightly about 9%, created the homelands, this idea of language-based enclaves started gaining ground, and the Nationalist Party started working on it and refining it until the eventual establishment of homelands. While that was happening on the side, the Group Areas Act kicked in, and it started creating what you call townships. And then you saw the mushrooming of townships in 1955 moving forward. The war ends 1948. It's only, 6 years later. So they were quite efficient in signing all of these pieces of legislation into law. And then in 1955, we start seeing the mushrooming of townships. And purely, the townships would probably not even have been necessary had it really been their wish, but they needed workers in the mines, in the mushrooming industrial belts around the big cities. So townships offered closer proximity to these factories and industries and so on. But the Group Areas Act came with curfews in some cities, in some towns, where your workers can come into the city between, say, 5 in the morning until about 6 in the evening. Those who were required to work beyond the stipulated times had to have a special permit to be in the city beyond the beginning of the curfew. And that's when now these past laws took effect. And then we know the march by the ladies to the union buildings, people like Lillian Ngoyi and others. But remaining on the Group Areas Act, it meant that the National Party had to start financing the relationship for the townships, building schools, implementing budget education, so that whoever is closer to the city must remain uneducated as much as possible. You created a generation of just laborers. The only thing, the majority of black people at the time, it could be a nurse, a driver, a policeman, a security guard, a teacher. Basically, if you're a teacher, a policeman, a clerk, those were looked upon as better jobs. However, how many scientists that Bantu education produced. Though it did, but not through Bantu education. It's people who left the country who went to acquire. The Group Areas Act had its tentacles in every part of the black family, in education, provision of health care, the kind of areas where black people could live. You had mine dumps or mining right into Soweto up to Middlewest. And those mine dumps are poisonous, but people lived there. You wouldn't find a white suburb next to a mine dump.
No.
You see. So all of those, the Group Areas Act, its implementation was quite brutal.
Yeah.
And the resulting PAS laws that came with it resulted in the majority of black men being imprisoned.
So there's a lot to unpack from what you just said, but my first thought was how if you had to zoom out and look at this from the international community's perspective, it's actually laughable at how the Afrikaans government at that time, the apartheid government, justified this homelands. Wait, so is the homelands was that a separate law, or was the Group Areas Act, did that inform the creation of homelands, or was the Group Areas Act the creation of homelands?
Apartheid was a grand scheme.
Yeah.
It was a revolving door of laws that were feeding into each other.
Yeah.
A lot of people who lived in the township, when they of pension age, then the right to be in the township would lapse, some of them. So you'd be required to go to your homeland.
Okay, so when were homelands established? I'm asking if those were separate laws.
They started in the 60s.
Okay, so this was after the Group Areas Act.
Yes.
So if you had to zoom out and look at this from the international community's perspective, how the Afrikaans government justified it was saying that, okay, we're creating our own we're creating little states. You know, we want Black people to be independent, to rule their own people. We want to create their own little mini nation states, but it's such a toxic relationship of the oppressor and the oppressed, where okay, it appears like they're doing us a favor, when actually, I'm saying this is how it looked like from the international community's perspective, when actually, as you were saying, they were keeping us so small, so uneducated, so so unable to actually prosper and thrive as individuals, as families. And it's actually,
if I may add to what you're saying, I know you can share something in the top, but I want to add to this creation of homelands and the bigger international similarities, if I may add. You see, divided rule is a very powerful tool to divide those you seek to conquer. Now, we would have all these phobias, right? Islamophobia, Russophobia, Chinophobia, even what do you call it, xenophobia. The propagandization of that which to divide is quite effective because there is a control of certain information to serve a particular agenda. Now, Muslims are by and large all Muslims. They praise the same Allah. So, but then now you hear or you see a high pronouncement of the Shia and the Sunni divide the Muslim community. And then you have South Africans not wanting Malawians or Ghanaians or this or that. And vice versa, by the way. It's not only South African, but vice versa. So dividing people within who are the same race within the same continent works for the big agenda. Divide the Arabs based on one dynamic that holds them together, which is religion. It works for the imperialist. And so when you come at the macro level in South Africa, you have all these ethnic groups. And if you divide them, you, you'll see they won't fight for their freedom. There won't be a struggle for freedom because all of them will be, I am this, I am that, I am Bedi, I'm Zulu, I'm Xhosa, I'm Tswana, I'm Tsonga, I'm Venda. Now the struggle for a united South Africa will just fizzle off. And so divide and rule is a very powerful weapon to use to divide people. And one has to be very aware of how it's used and how it's spun and made to make us believe that actually it is true. You know, I just wanted to add.
Yeah, it's really profound and really important that people understand that divide and conquer mentality, that tool, and even how it happens on a domestic level. Because for me, it all starts with a family unit at the end of the day. And I even like to look at the international community as a kind of familial unit. But the building block for any society is a family. And what the West did with their so-called modernization schemes is divide the family. And we have this example here that I want to share. It says, all busy cooking. And on the next morning, 1st November 1939, about twilight, where we're feasting, there came two policemen and two police boys on a pickup. They arrested Franz and punished him severely, and many others, as well as the ladies, for passes and taxes. They kicked and whipped us, I tell you. Oh, it was a very sad night. The people ran away and ran over the children's heads through the doings of the policemen. We were taken in front of the magistrate, and no question was asked to any one of us about her on or his guilty. 7 days, 10 questions. 7 days, 10 shillings was the fine. Through the solicits of the law, the fine was then charged to 7 days. Oh dear sir, where are we going to get living? We Bantu people, as we are much troubled in this country, troubled by our European friends. Where will our children hold weddings because our commissioner is heartily against these purposes? Aren't the European ladies also getting married? And doesn't the fathers invite all their friends? Why not possible to ours? Quantity of foods were spoiled that day, and our mirth was mad. For an example, we were happy for the two obedient pairs who respectively satisfy our will. Pity, the policeman and magistrate, marred our joy. So it's such a sad letter in so many ways. It's heart wrenching. He's trying to communicate as best as he can. I mean, with such a broken heart to what happened to his fellow brothers and sisters. And he's doing it with such humility, calling them our European
I was
friends.
just about to do
Imagine that, our European friends, not sinister, not angry, just saying, help us,
Exactly.
help us.
When you brutalize good-hearted people and the pain they feel, the pain you inflict upon them, we talk about karma, right? And show me one empire that has used force, that has used pain and fear, that has stood the test of time. I don't think any can stand that. Eventually, everything will crumble. Only things that are built on love last, and things that are built on hatred and subjugation and dispossession and creating conditions for poverty and hunger don't last.
And yeah, because I remember asking you last night about, how is it that we have a people that have inflicted so much pain for so many years, and they were so successful in their defense force, in their policing mechanisms, that we, without guns, without high technology, access to advanced technology, we managed to defeat or topple this government. And I think it does speak to that there's no empire built on greed and and cruelty that will last.
There's a quote, I don't remember who to attribute to, but it was a very common slogan during the struggle for liberation in South Africa. It used to go like this: there comes a time in the life of every nation when enough is enough and there won't be any surrender. And
Sure.
whatever you do, no matter how many people you may incarcerate, no matter how many people you may kill, the combined resolve of the people, of the oppressed, of those who are experiencing your tyranny can never be diminished. You are creating Che Guevara's left, right, and center. You are creating Steve Biko's. You are creating Robert Sobukwe's. You're creating Solomon Mahlangu's. Each and every one that you kill, you're creating 10 more of those.
You can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, so we have this past system, this premise system, and it leads to the last thing I want to speak to you about, and that is the paternalistic relationship between whites and blacks. So, in chapter 9 of the book, we have a very key moment in Kas's life where he's conscientized to this racial paternalism, but in such a profound way. He always knew that it was there, it existed. He played along with it to his benefit. He let it work for him. But this was shocking because he had developed a relationship with a farmer, Piet Labuschagne. And Piet Labuschagne, this was a special relationship because, firstly, they shared the same agricultural ambitions and also the same work ethic. So they were quite friendly. They were quite, I don't want to say close, but it was an exceptional relationship.
And cordial.
And it was cordial. They would drink together. He was very fair with the agreements. He stuck to his end of the bargain. And then something happens. So, okay, we have an incident where Kas's cattle jumps the fence or roams onto a neighboring farmer's fence. And this white farmer, Kutsia, he decides to, instead of consulting anyone, asking anyone what happened, he just takes this cattle straight to the impound. So Kas would have to now pay. So Labuschagne, he gets involved, okay, because now this is tricky territory for Kas. As a black man, you can never come man to man with another white man. It's always black man to white man. So he didn't know what to do. Labuschagne intervenes and defends Kas, but listen to how he defends Kas. He says, Labuschagne lost his temper. This is now, he's addressing Kutsia. Lost his temper and told him, Kutsia, that the kafir belonged to him. He threatened to punch him so hard that he would end up back in the farmhouse. Everything on Valrand belonged to him, he told Kutsia. The kafir owned nothing. So he's basically saying when you go and you impound this cattle, you're impounding my cattle. Everything here is not because it's mine. So basically, you mess with him, you mess with me. So that was his idea of defending Kas. And because he felt uncomfortable.
It's a tricky catch-22, right?
Exactly. He felt uncomfortable because it's like, okay, fine, he's defending me, but at the same time, he's calling me his. I'm a nothing man. I'm property. And this is how Kas takes it. He says, Kas was gradually coming round to the view that for all its many virtues in a harsh environment, paternalism was predicated on a structured inequality that required the perpetual adolescence of the junior partner. It left a black farmer with no room for either psychological or economic growth. I really I really like that last line. It left a black farmer with no room for either psychological or economic growth. That explains literally what's going on today. So my question to you, or you know, what I want to hear your thoughts on is how has this, because we know that in this current order, even now in modern times, this paternalistic relationship is still wrought. It's still when I look around, I see us show animals in suits, jumping around and waiting for the colonizers, the neo colonizers now to say, well done, you're doing very well. So I want to ask you, specifically in South Africa, how has this paternalistic relationship, this Afrikaner paternalism carried out until now?
I'm going to pick exactly what you just, the economic and the psychological. And I'm going to leave the economic out. So it's all about the land. With land, you can build a sustainable economy. The psychological part of it is a very interesting part of that relationship. To this day, there are people who still cannot or are unable to call a white person by name. That's deeply psychological. You'll hear an old lady, 65-year-old, a maid or a house helper, not being able to call a 25-year-old by name. Still calls them Mrs.
Ma'am,
Bas, Say, because the tongue is so oppressed that he can't even say bit, yan. They don't know of any other word except that. That's how deeply psychological that paternalistic relationship is. You'll never see a black man cosplaying with a white man, hooking up to a white man, a little punch.
What's up, man?
You
Am I
know,
rude? No,
but
no.
white men will always see a black man as a piece of toy. Come, yeah, punching, pulling around, pat him on the head. Some of them think that's showing affection, but it's demeaning to the man. These are men who go home knowing in the back of their minds that they are viewed as little boys where they come from, where they work. And that paternalistic relationship still continues to this day. When you're having a conversation with a fellow white man, another white man comes. He won't come with respect between the two of you. He won't say, excuse me, guys. He'll go straight and start a conversation with the white guy, as if you don't exist. You're on the periphery of his vision, of his thoughts, your existence is not recognized at that moment. So those relationships still continue, and by and large, they are caused by that Calvinistic ingrained ideology of divine right to bring light to the barbarians, divine right to rule over the land. You have this inherent, ingrained belief that all that you are is ordained by God. And it's got nothing to do with religion. It's got to do with the human mind, the, the need to control, the need to steal the land, steal the resources, both above and below ground. And that relationship still persists. And I dare to even say, even during the GNU of the first, after 1994, the ANC, other parties together, the National Party, you could see part of it. And to this one, there's a bit of it as well between the ANC and the DA. There is that part of the that paternalistic relationship where the white man knows better. Even though your ideas are brilliant, but they are interrogated.
That's something that I need to look into deeper. I think we should look into that deeper, and maybe we should make that the focus of our next segment.
Yeah.
That could be really interesting.
Yeah. And alongside that, you look at your not religion, but the church. Nothing to do with the structure of the church, and with a special focus on the Nkhiya, which had two parts: the black Nkhiya and the white Nkhiya. So
imagine having two parts of a church.
The same church.
Because of course God sees black and white.
Dutch Reformed Church.
How can you justify that as a religious, spiritual human being? How can you justify racial segregation of a church?
You know, so that even led to Bears No Dear. I'm sure you've seen a role somewhere in Job at Bears No Dear.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, leaving the white and here for me his own church because he stood up against this injustice. Because the Nkhiya was seen to be the quasi-official church of the state, which endorsed apartheid, and so that paternalistic relationship is influenced by ideology. It's influenced by this notion that the Afrikaner is a nomad from where they come from, and all they are about is to bring light to those who have never seen light. And the parallels with Israel are astounding. We'll get there some other time.
Whoa, sure. Actually, I'd like to leave it there because what you said was really powerful, and we should end on that note, and we should reconvene.
It's been a pleasure.
Segment. Thank you.
And we'll meet again.
Yeah. So thank you guys for tuning in, and yeah, we will see you next time.
Bye.